Hello, good afternoon, evening, morning, wherever it is you're joining us from. Welcome to our Ways of Writing Good Scenarios panel at the Weekend with Good Friends. I'm your moderator, VJ Stonecraft, and I'll be guiding our conversation today. By day, I'm a museum curator and director of programs, and my historical focus is the intersection between women, madness, and queerness. I've worked in the museum field for a decade, highlighting hidden stories at the margins of history. And I've been playing Call of Cthulhu for nearly as long. I'm a contributing author for the upcoming Cthulhu by Gaslight sourcebook, and have 2 scenarios awaiting publication for a related Gaslight supplement through Chaosium. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our rogue gallery of participants today. Graeme is a dyslexic Scottish writer currently living in England by the sea. He runs RPG Nook, which breaks apart scenarios to see how they tick, and written a slew of horror scenarios. He's also been a writer on the multi-award-winning horror podcast Ain't Slayed Nobody for a few years now, and being the lead on Bleaker Trails and writing a couple of audio dramas as well for the show, including being a guest writer on the Magnus Protocol, 9 to Midnight, Kill FM, and Creepy Podcast. T.A. Newman is the host of the Miskatonic Playhouse, a voice actor, and TTRPG writer who has 3 best-selling Call of Cthulhu scenarios, and an upcoming Regency Cthulhu campaign, Cult and Culpability. At the Miskatonic Playhouse, he works with an amazing team of actual play, Miskatonic repository scenario writing, and champions the community of writers who publish under that license. You can find Newman at miskatonicplayhouse.com or on his Discord server, and on all other socials as T.A. Newman and the Miskatonic Playhouse. Khaldoun Khelil has been developing and writing games for over 20 years. He's written for numerous RPGs and worked for think tanks such as the Middle East Institute and the World Policy Institute. Khaldoun writes games of personal horror, political conspiracy, and dark fantasy. His credits include work on Dune, Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf the Apocalypse, Mummy the Curse, Vampire the Requiem, and Cthulhu Awakens. Most recently, he was the developer and principal author on The Black Hand, playing for Sabbat for version 5's Storyteller's Vault. Doc is a chemistry professor living in Western Pennsylvania with his wife. He can be found on various Discord servers, including those for the How We Roll podcast, the Good Friends of Jackson Elias, the Old Ways podcast, and Symphony Entertainment. He has made appearances on the Symphony Entertainment Twitch page, streaming Call of Cthulhu, improvisational horror, and cult Divinity Lost. Though he writes Call of Cthulhu scenarios, he also has a ridiculous number of TTRPGs on his shelf, and he's happy to talk about them if you ask. If you'd like to get in touch, you can do so on Discord at drbones412. You can also find his Call of Cthulhu scenarios online. And finally, last but not least, we have Monte. While being raised on in an adjacent town to Portland, Oregon, Monte edits, writes, and plays tabletop role-playing games and writes short stories. Clarion West got him to write about dying universes, edible sins, dreaming mountains, and singularities made of anxieties. His TTRPG credits include Magpie Games' hit Avatar Legends, the game based on Avatar: The Last Airbender, Afterlife, Fated Souls, the surreal horror fantasy game from Angry Hamster Publishing, and writing for Paizo, Green Ronin, and Fantasy Flight Edge. He is currently the managing editor for the Hugo Award-winning Uncanny Magazine. He can be found posting Doctor Who news, Asian American diaspora discourse, and his board game losses on Blue Sky. All right. So, before we dive into some of the nitty-gritty of discussing the process of writing good scenarios, I think it might be necessary to actually define for each of us what that means. What makes a good scenario? What makes something stand out? So if we can kind of go one by one and kind of give an overview of what that looks like for us. What makes a good scenario for each of you?
Dangerous territory. Who's going first?
Fletcher Voltaire.
Okay, I'll set out the basic steps, shall I? Then you guys can say all the clever things. I think a scenario, especially if we're looking at ways at writing good scenarios, a lot of new authors, there are some significant aspects that, as a newer author, you might want to include. Obviously, as your skill refines and you develop, you can play and break and manipulate these to hell. But I was very lucky. I do moonlight as a drama teacher, and I had I had 28 year 9 girls. That's about like 12 years old, doing their first create your own role play experience yesterday, and it was amazing. All they needed to do it was a location, a mystery. Ideally, I was trying to get them to create some kind of handout or something that they could kind of play with that, and some kind of threat and a buy-in for the players. And those 5 things, I think, for 28 kind of 11, 12-year-olds, they did some of the most amazing kind of role-playing I've ever seen. These girls were absolutely amazing. And it kind of blew my mind and made me go, I need to do more of this. Yeah. So I will start at that very basic level. If you kind of have some key ingredients, there are certain things that you're going to want either your GM, your keeper, your storyteller, your handler, whoever to have that they can create that story with. But you're also going to need things that the players need, like that initial buy-in, whether you have been bitten by a vampire, whether you're called up by this agency, whether you work for so-and-so, whether a personal person to you is in danger. You've got to have that investment to kind of start with for the players to invest in. I'll be quiet and let the smart people talk now.
Anybody want to kind of... Oh.
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in.
Go ahead, Doc.
Doc, do you want to talk? That's cool.
I was going to jump on what Newman said there about having that good skeleton really makes a difference, because some of my favorite scenarios, the hook is you are on your way to a location because of something already. In the questions, Vijay, that you sent us, what's the best scenario we've ever read or run? Sort of like shoehorn that in a little bit. One that came to mind for me was Saturday the 14th by Rena Henze. If you've read it, you know why, because the buy-in is immediate. You are on your way to a summer camp because something has happened. It hooks you immediately, and it takes the tropes that you think are going to be there and does something unique with them. Having a fun, unique something to stand out is what makes a good scenario for me.
Yeah.
Can I just recognize? Oh, yeah. Sorry, Graeme. Can I just recognize that I didn't answer the question in any way, shape, or form? I just totally recognized that. I was just like, oh, right, you asked us what our thing was. Sorry, just to jump in. Really fortunate, really fortunate. I felt like a bit of a cheat for a long time, having not done this, but I'm a player at the moment in Horror on the Orient Express. It's great playing it, but also as you're playing it, you're totally as someone who kind of like writes obviously scenarios and things, you're kind of just breaking it apart as you're playing, kind of going, okay, I can see how well this is set up. It's brilliant at the start in its vagueness. You know that there's this overarching thing. There's no secret that you're going to be on the Orient Express and there's going to be horrors. And I quite like that we know that that's the case of it. I suppose it's a bit like if you look at Mass of Nyarlathotep, you probably assume a certain villain is going to turn up at some point because the name's in the title. But the buy-in and I think the freedom that comes with that, because of the role-playing ability that you give to the players, they know it. We all have that suspension of disbelief where we go, I'm not going to, I don't know that the train's going to be, kitted out with monsters and things or whatever yet, or I don't know these locations are going to be scary yet. So you get to play it. So I think that suspension of disbelief is a key thing in great scenarios that you get to play. And the Horror on the Orient Express is a great one. Sorry, everyone.
Graeme, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, you have to have that foundation, because if your foundation is shaky, it's going to be a very difficult time to add the detail to your scenario. So you're right, you have that hook, you've got to have the right sort of like elements there underneath it. But if you're making horror, I do have like 5 things I do look for in a good horror scenario: brutality, humanity, wonder, mystery, and atmosphere. These are the things I think make something that's unique and will stand out from the pack. If you have a good mix of these elements, it'll really bolster the player's imagination and invest them. If you bring these sort of elements to the table, it's like you make a cookie cutter scenario from the basics, but you really need to have the depth and breadth of these tones to really make something sing. For a good example of that is Oakwood Heights, which is a cult scenario. It was one of the first ones I played, and it is brutal and quite dark. It does things quite differently as well. You already know the story, but you're there to find out why it happened, and you have to take this killer through the crime scenes where he committed these sins, and like learn a bit about yourself as well as him along the way. It's very different, and yeah, I really like that. Other than that, the classic haunting is basically by the numbers scenario. It is so solid because it's been reiterated again and again. I think it's been published 3 to 5 times. I can't remember how many, but it's got it's been refined so much that it's hard to break it and say there's a problem with it. There's a couple of things here and there, but yeah, it's a classic, and it is a classic for a reason.
Moon or Monte, do you have any insight into what makes a good scenario, or even just an example of a scenario that really stands out from the pack for you?
I really want to lean into Newman talking about buy-in. I tend to run games very open, like open world. It's very, very highly dependent on like players being really engaged. And this might be me shilling for the company I work for, but Angry Hamster Press has a quick start for their Witch Fated Souls RPG that was kickstarted last year. And the buy-in is really important because when you are passing out the sample characters, you are also laying out several questions about an NPC. Basically, you're forming this like cinnamon roll of an NPC, asking questions of like, oh, how did you meet? Even really interesting questions like, how did you fail them? Right? And right away, there's a discussion about this NPC that like the players are like really thinking about. And then the scenario starts by going, he's missing. What do you do now? And so like you've now spent 15, 30 minutes building up this character that like, oh man, like now I'm really invested. And now all of a sudden the scenario is friend is missing. What do you do? And so I run it several times, and each time it seems to grab people because got this cinnamon roll of a guy who's just working to help support his disabled mom and his siblings, and all he just wants to do is do right by his family. And now something you might have done has screwed up his life, and now you have to try to fix it. That's That's player buy-in. That's
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would tag along with most of what everyone else is saying, like player buy-in, like a good hook, whether that's player buy-in or an interesting location or something new. That's always what I look for in an adventure. And when writing an adventure, whether you're a new writer or an old one, I think that's always what you're shooting for. Is maybe not something that's completely original or off the wall, but hopefully something that you haven't seen before. And often that's an interesting spin on an old trope, whether it's something like a reverse heist where you're putting something back instead of stealing it, or anything on those lines, or you describe an NPC only to do something horrible to him, and now you have to fix it. That's kind of a funny twist. So I find that something that tickles players' fancy in a different way than they're used to, and gets them hooked into the story is always good. Because you don't want them to feel like they're on rails, even though most times they are on rails, really, because as the DM, storyteller, narrator, whatever, you are the rails, they are the train, and as much of an illusion of their control, their control is an illusion, just like real life.
So we're already kind of deviating a bit from the questions that I sent all of you, so I apologize for that. But in kind of listening to different things that you all said in response to the opener, both Newman and Graeme have mentioned, having like the 5 things that they look for, or that they incorporate when writing a scenario. So when you are writing a scenario, where do you start? Do you start with the hook? Do you start with the humanity? Do you have a monster in mind or a setting? Like, what is the initial spark that gets you going?
Noon?
Sure. Well, usually I'm a bit of a snob, so for me, it's usually I'm trying to make a point, I guess. So usually I'm trying to make a point. I'm trying to say something, whether it's something as big as capitalism is bad, or this guy's really, or this guy sucks, something like that. So usually when I'm trying to make a point, I don't want to put that right in their face, but that's usually what I'm going for when I'm writing an adventure. Is I want to make a point, and I'm excited about that point and that idea, and then I'll build a scenario around that. Um, I think that's mostly what it is for me. Often, because I write in the kind of you play the monster genre or you play the bad guy or genre. Often, the point I'm making is that the real monsters are people. And that's usually the story. Most of the stories I tell kind of boil down to that. And so you usually something will get me excited about, oh, how can I show people how bad people are? And then, I'll write an adventure around that. So that's really that's really the grounding principle for me.
I think I have begin to slowly evolve to that place. I definitely didn't start there. I think when I started, it was the idea of I've got a really cool idea that I'd love to put some players through, and essentially it was not too dissimilar in terms of let's have a bit of a societal mirror so that the players get this fun role-playing experience, but they kind of get to look at themselves and make some choices and see what happens safely as these role-playing characters, not as themselves. But the first thing I wrote seriously literally was the prisoner's dilemma. It is a dilemma situation where they're presented with guys, you could get out of this. Oh, spoiler alert, should probably no one's going to play it. It's all right. Don't worry about it. I played it once. It's okay. There's this classic moment where towards the end of the scenario, there is a dilemma. You can work as a team, and it's going to be bloody hard to get out of this situation, to get out of this horrific situation, or you can kind of sacrifice one of the group. And it's easier to get out. And I think putting the players in that situation, obviously there's a significant narrative, story, character investment, player into player, and, kind of content warnings for player versus player. All of these things are intertwined within it. But that's where I started. I started with, I think, the drama of it, the drama of role playing, going, how can I present this really cool moment? But, with Khaldoun kind of saying about those bigger things like these statements, that's, I think, where I've begun to evolve to and refine to. But I still not sure where you are on my screen. I still buy your books, Khaldoun, and look at them and go, oh man, that's what I should be doing. That's what I should be doing. So yeah, the refinement is in process, but I'm really, it's really interesting to hear that.
I guess I'll pipe up here then, because I'm kind of the opposite. I don't tend to like putting something in. 'Cause I always feel like I'm preaching, and I always feel awkward doing that sort of thing. I'll generally have something in as maybe, if you want, capitalism as a sort of downtrodden group of people under the burden of capitalism, but I wouldn't really highlight it as a main thing I'd focus on. I tend to focus on people's traumas and themes about death or emotions that they're going through, as some sort of plight for the character to have a character arc, rather than, because I always separate plot and story. The plot is your sort of overall arcing meta that you're telling as a keeper in the background, and then you have the stories of the characters and the PCs which sort of interact with that in various levels, and both will kind of go in tandem and bounce off each other every so often. But it tend to be very character focused rather than sort of more meta than that.
I have a terrible answer. It's basically whatever I'm like nerdily obsessed with at the time.
Awesome.
So like one of the first things I wrote was for Dungeon Magazine, and it takes place at a garbage disposal site simply because I had worked at a waste management company. And I wanted to really like have the word leachate appear in a game text somewhere. So it's terrible advice. Nobody take that. Like, don't spill out your obsessions for other people to like nitpick. That's.
Oh, Monte, we're not so different, you and I. My second scenario ever published was because I drive by a cemetery every day going to work, and one morning, the morning mist just hung on it gorgeously. And so I told myself, I'm going to be late to work today. Drove into the cemetery, took some inspirational pictures, and I got to work. I was like, well, you're like 5 minutes into your class. I said, look, here's these pictures I took. They're great. And then just went from there. I mean, it's also, I kind of found it funny that I'm in my office right now because I have a sticky note for the scenario that I'm writing. And you can see there's not much on here. but it's at about 14,000 words right now because I started with an ending. I said, I like this one line of buildings melt like wax. And I said, how can I work that single line into a full 4-hour scenario that is a climactic thing you see? And I'm kind of glad you can't read the handwriting on that because the ending is on that sticky note. But it's very much just this shotgun of, I have an idea, and I grab my phone, go to my notes app, and just write down one line and say, how can I then make this line into a full 4-hour thing that people will care about? Because I feel like that's always, to go back to that buy-in, I have an ending of, I want this to be their big like revelation moment. How do I make players who have no idea where they're starting with, how do I get them to care that happens?
Yeah.
That's kind of, with my process, I mean, my phone is full of about 17 or 18 ideas that I'm probably going to scrap 16 or 15 or 16 of them by now, but I always just write down everything I can as soon as I can.
You know, that post-it note just said, write good scenario, right?
I need to make a stand roll, you're right!
So when you're thinking about process, are you very method over madness? Do you go like step by step by step, A, B, C, D down the line, or is it more of like a holistic approach? And has that changed the longer you've been writing?
I'll jump in on this one, I guess.
Sure.
When I first started writing, I tried to be very methodical, very step-by-step, thinking my players are going to find this clue, and this is what they're going to think about it, and this is the conclusion they're going to come to. And then I had my very first playtest, and I threw all of that out the window. Because the one thing I've learned, if you can give the players anything, like you say there's a suit of armor somewhere, one of them will inevitably try to ask, what is it holding, and can I weaponize it? And then potentially utilize said weapon in a climax to kill another player. I had never thought of that. As written, there is no weapon in the hand, but as you can see in Newman's face, I'm kind of calling him out on this one. But now when I write, I go in with maybe a 3-act structure of, here's the setup, here's the twist, here's the ending. And if I have more than a sheet of paper written going into the first playtest, I feel like I've overwritten. I let it be very natural and see where people go, because I can't predict what somebody's going to think. If I say, hey, there's a sticky note on the door, they go, right, but what about this power outlet in the corner that you didn't describe? So I kind of let the first round of playtests inform the writing from there, keeping it very natural. And Newman, you had to know I was going to call you out on that.
100%. I'm just waiting for somebody to say something profound so I can go, yeah, me too.
Yeah, I was kind of waiting for the veterans to jump in here to really fill the space. But if no one's going to speak, I tend to write a 300-word outline, a pitch for my scenarios. Basically, that includes 5 or so things. Like, it'll have the stakes, it'll have the hook, it'll have the climax, it'll have events which will happen along the way, and it'll have the mood and tone. So it's basically the very fundamentals, which was Newman was kind of talking about right at the start. And it's like, I'll write that pitch. If I can't fit it into 300 words, that's probably too complicated, and it'll probably need revisited at some point. And then what I'll do, I'll extrapolate that out into basically plot points along the way, and see where I am there. And then you put stakes in the ground, and then you go and play test it and see where the wiggly line takes you from point to point to point, and then you refine from there. And that's kind of how I do. The more you write, the more points you can skip because you get used to it. You can just do it in your head. But I always find it's good to just, stop that, go back to basics every now and then, and remind yourself that, because you tend to forget little points. They sort of wear in your memory, and you sort of like fade into black, and got to go back to the basics all the time and remind yourself to keep doing these really good things.
I guess for me, I would often have kind of a set piece scene, I guess, that I would have in my mind. And that would really, and it wouldn't always necessarily be the climax. It could be the opening scene, or the epilogue, or whatnot. I don't really write this way too much anymore, but I guess when I was really starting out, that's really what I was like. Oh, I really love this scene, to see this happen. And I think when I first started writing, I kind of shot for that scene. Now I feel like I'm really shooting for. I want to have everything in place where that scene could happen, as opposed to that scene, materializing being the goal. So for me, I like to, I guess, write down all the pieces. Usually the villain, and the goals, and maybe the location. That's really where I kind of start. And I'm also pretty standard. I usually go for 3 acts, with the setup, the twist, and then kind of the conclusion. And then also, and then as I write, it kind of builds itself. I don't usually write it often changes after that, but usually everything starts out as just a bullet pointed list, a page of half a page, and then I start writing from there. Usually I'll, it'll really build itself in the writing, I guess. Yeah.
I don't
Monte,
think I have too
I
much
was
to
gonna-
add. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, Monty. I was going to say I'll go after you because, like I said, I can steal really clever things. So I was literally poisoning myself to wait for you guys to speak.
I was actually saying that, like, I don't know if I have too much to add. I generally usually have an idea of an ending. It's probably not an ending that'll actually make it into a draft, but it's the thing that helps me anchor myself, because it's a role playing game, so you can go everywhere or anywhere. I'm that weirdo in the cafe that has, like, back of a napkin and drawing weird lines and I just look weird and crazy, and that's generally how I figure out, like, where the possibility of leading from that potential ending. And it's usually I'm on deadlines, so I'm vomiting as many words as I can every day in order to meet that deadline, and then hopefully some sort of magic occurs out of all that. So it's chaos. It's just pure chaos.
I think the only thing I can add to this really is, I completely agree with Graeme talking about having that limited content to start with. Everyone kind of mentioning this, what seems to be a good guidance, this 3-act structure, so that you've got those significant, I suppose, evolutionary points for the story where the players, they feel like they're going through an evolving narrative, and they're evolving along with the narrative. I think the only thing, and this was something that was kind of, I suppose, discussed once upon a time, so I wouldn't claim ownership of this, but I've kind of gone, actually, is actually having really good characters with the, I know earlier that we talked about the characters got to have an investment, whether they be an investigator, a vampire, an adventurer, whatever they are. But actually, I think there's some works out there you'd see, and there's a bloody good campaign or scenario, and then there's just some people that you play. But I think when those characters that you take on and you role play, if they are written in such a way that you are so invested in them, and then you get to kind of invest in the story, it adds a whole new dynamic dimension to everything. If the two are so intertwined and interweaved, then that's, I suppose that's when you find yourself, with a book on the shelf, isn't it?
Yeah. Your characters are your story.
Yeah, 100%. I'm writing that down, Graeme.
And so when you are developing a story, what do you feel changes it the most or adds the most life or humanity, as Graham has mentioned before, to the words that are on the paper? You know, is it rewriting? Is it research? Is it play tests? Is it seeing how people interact with your world? What really shapes the final product the most?
Ooh, that's a good question. You're muted, Doc, if you're talking.
I mean, I could throw in there something I found lately is for the scenario that I'm currently working on is doing a lot of research has really shifted away from what I initially had written. I ran a playtest for some lovely people, and they pointed out it's good, but you should definitely read this book. And they gave me a book called Bloods, which is an oral history of the Vietnam War from African American soldiers who were sent overseas. And it completely, I rewrote half the scenario just from reading that book. All of the characters are now not just these one-dimensional people, but I've taken and said, here's a person's story. Here's how I can utilize that research to make this feel realer because it's real now. And I found that the researching really tinkers with things and makes it more interesting because we can always try to write from the perspective that we know. Like, I could write a lot about chemistry and science. It'd be a boring scenario. But if I could take that knowledge of chemistry and science and make it interesting and work in, like, say, a fictional poison or something, then it gets interesting when it's rooted in some level of realism to make it bring some life into it, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, you shouldn't be afraid to talk to people as well. I think getting tertiary information is fine from the internet and stuff like that, but actually talking to people and museums are where you need to do. I've emailed a ton of museums when I'm talking about Old West stuff and sort of reservations and stuff like that. You can go and just online, everyone's available to you. There's an email for everyone, and they're generally usually very interested to hear random weird ass questions that no one else will ask, and they'll more than likely to help you as well. When I was researching the Old West, I was doing a scenario from it was on the Carson Pass, the Carson Trail, all the way up through to which is now Pacerville, which was Hangtown at the time. And I needed something to base Hangtown on because there's nothing. It's like it was just there for a split moment, and it was kind of like destroyed and modernized, and it's all changed. And you've just got to go to the historian to go to the source and really pick the brains of experts. They're there to be used. They love it. That's what they just want to be abused.
Yeah, I can definitely attest to that. The more museum people you talk to with weird questions, it's gonna make us real happy. We love to talk about obscure, random shit. I recently contacted an archivist in New York about like a random medication that was used in the 19th century, and she got back to me an hour later with photocopies. So the worst someone can say is no.
Yeah, if it's your specialism and someone says, "Hey, do you want to talk about the thing that you're a specialist in?" It's like, yeah, okay, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah. I see nerd obsessions that powers the creative world. So, yeah.
See, when you said sewage facility, I went, "Oh, I did environmental engineering once. That's interesting to me." So I'd like to have that scenario about a sewage plant. Maybe that'd be kind of cool. So maybe do it.
Yeah.
Right. Anyone else on what kind of shapes your world or the world of your scenario as you're writing it? If not, we can move on.
I think someone mentioned it already, so just to highlight it, I think it is quite exciting if you get an idea for maybe like a set piece. That can be a big driver because you're so excited about that moment. Obviously, it can change, and you've got to place it somewhere. And there's there's the characters, there's the villains, there's everything else going on around it. But I think sometimes that idea of a set piece, something that you'd like to deliver as a finale, or at least a confrontation or an evolutionary moment of the narrative. I think those can be so inspiring for a writer that you're kind of like, I love this idea that this gets to be experienced, and that can be a big driver for kind of producing that material.
What is the best knockout set piece that you've seen in a scenario that you're like, I wish I had thought of that idea. I wish this had been mine.
Ooh.
I can
Well,
kind of go first as a
Sure, yeah.
as an
Yeah,
example. So a lot of the scenarios that I write are for Cthulhu by Gaslight. Victorian London is kind of my specialty. If you've ever heard of or played the Necropolis Express, it's a Stygian Fox scenario. Almost all of the scenario takes place on a train that's transporting dead bodies from out of London to a different cemetery. And the location of it, the sensory aspects of being on that train, even weird details like living people costing more on the train than dead bodies, every little detail of this train is bizarre and just kind of immerses you in it immediately and makes a hell of a set piece for the action and the horror that comes after as well. So that's one for me that, I'm like, oh God, I really wish I had thought of this and not the writer.
I can just a quick one on this. I was very lucky enough a long time ago to play in Viral, which is a Call of Cthulhu scenario by Alex Goulot and Bud, and Alex actually ran it for us, which was amazing. I was really lucky because the basic collection of investigators in this, and this is one of the things that made me really appreciate just how investigators can be written really, really, really well, was that they were a bunch of YouTubers. And the idea was that they are like a most haunted type of group. They go off to this Italian little island. I won't do too many spoilers. But one of the brilliant things was that I hadn't experienced before was that the writers had really challenged themselves to look at how you can involve technology and how the keeper or the GM or your storyteller can manipulate that. So mid playing the game, we've got one guy who's my friend Pete, who's playing the cameraman. We got another guy who's the editor and whatever. I was the host, and I'm doing this thing, and all of a sudden, Alex, as the keeper, is kind of going, "You're getting a message, and it's from your producer, and it's the YouTubers. They're asking you to do this." And it's like, okay. So they were live streaming from this haunted island, and the YouTubers, basically another tool for the keeper, the storyteller, to manipulate the players and say, you don't have to do it, but here's an option. You want to do this, it'll get you another X amount of subscribers. And because that was such the goal of the characters was to try and build up their subscribers, they were willing to do increasingly, exponentially, increasingly scarier stuff. And I just loved the way it built up. There are a number of fantastic set pieces, but I loved the overall. I tell you what it added is, in a normal spooky scenario, you're going, oh, should I do that? I don't think my character would do that because it's really scary. In this, this is really scary, but my motivation is if I do it, I'm going to get more YouTube subscribers for our fictional YouTube channel. So it gave you excuses to do silly things. And I really love that. I think that was such a cool mechanic and a clever way to get us to experience some of the bigger set pieces that we might not have come across if we weren't motivated to.
I would throw out from the Unland scenario from Fear's Sharp Little Needles by Scott Dorward. Fantastic scenario. And it's a simple set piece that we can all envision it with just a few words. Abandoned amusement park.
Yeah.
You immediately get a visual of what it is. And to his credit, he didn't overwrite everything you see. It was very much you let the mind fill in the blanks because this may sound like a bit of a tangent, but one of my favorite horror movies is the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Because you don't have to see a dismembered body to know something happened. The mind fills in the gaps. When you say abandoned amusement park, you probably immediately come to mind an overgrown carousel or a Ferris wheel that's rusting away and suddenly it just looks like it's falling apart and could drop at any minute. And it's a great set piece because it gives the keeper, whenever you run it, so much freedom to say, here's 5 or 6 places in this theme park. You go for the rest. It doesn't say what color the water is. It could be blue, could be brown, could be black. It could be the infamous brackish water, as every horror writer knows, like the go-to word. But it stands up because I was listening to an AP of it. There you go. I was listening to the Ain't Slayed Nobody playthrough of it.
Sorry.
Newman, you're a menace. But I was listening to it driving back from bartending a wedding, and I had to turn it off because the way the set piece was described, being on a back roads in Western Pennsylvania, was so much for me that I had to turn it off. I'm like, can't do this. I am too creeped out by a game that I know is fictional. But it just stands out. That to me is burned into my mind, is driving these back roads going, there's going to be a creepy clown somewhere any second now. There wasn't, thankfully. I made it home safe, but
I was gonna say it actually doesn't
Spoiler.
have one, does it? Yeah.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
that's brevity. It's like give me the creative freedom of a tight brief. He only had 4 pages to write that, didn't he? So it's like that's the sort of thing you can do if you actually contain yourself with word count and don't just be verbose about it. You have to like just half it and half it again and make sure it's tight as possible.
it's a
Because
skill,
at the
isn't
end
it?
Well, at the end of the day, scenarios are basically instruction manuals. They're not stories. They're there for the keeper to tell a story. They're a tool. So you got to be very tight with it and stop the sort of like purple prose so much, even though I put that in a lot sometimes. So yeah, for me, set pieces, I'm going to go for another good friend, Matt Sanderson, and go with Saturn Chalice, where the notorious Mr. Lester comes to the door again and again and again and again. And he just keeps coming for dinner, no matter what. There's 1,000 of them. Just they all sort of pile in, so they keep coming to the door, knocking, asking if you're there, and they start talking to each other around the dinner table when you don't know what the fuck is going on. And it's just like one of these what the fuck moments that really twist the scenario into right. Okay, so this is not just a house we're in; it's something else, and yeah, it gets progressively weird and uncanny, and then distraught after that as you like try to get your way out of it. But yeah, Mr. Lister's a very fun character.
I wonder if that was how that was conceived, that idea of the Mr. Lester returning again and again. I wonder what was the original seed for that, because that's quite a nice way to think about this as well, is looking at something that perhaps we all know or people know and kind of going, oh, where was the origin point for that?
The scenario is very interesting, actually. It plays a lot with certain things like food is tasteless and water doesn't have a smell. These sort of things that are really uncanny, small things to lead up to it. If you haven't played it, I won't say any more, but yeah, it's well worth a play. It's an incredibly creepy story.
I guess for me, the adventure that always comes to mind, I guess that really always stuck with me since I was much younger, is an adventure called From the Shadows, which is a Ravenloft adventure where the Lich Aslan basically captures the party in classic fashion, and he basically sends you back in time to basically mess with Strahd when he's not a vampire yet. And you basically die repeatedly, and the adventure basically becomes Groundhog's Day as Aslan repeatedly clones and sends you back in time to try and do it again. And each time you basically fail in some other spectacular new way. And when you first die, the first time you come back, because you don't even realize you're not in your real bodies, the party ends up like as, I think, heads on a shelf is when you come back. And I remember I was like, I knew it. These aren't our real heads. And and I was like, oh, that's a really almost like childish idea for a game, but somebody like, but I'm playing it. This is great.
Sounds awesome, to be honest.
Yeah. Write that down.
way for things to be. So the villain has to be interesting, or at least has to have a reason for what they're doing. I think great adventures are when the PCs are the instigators, but when you're writing a scenario, it's very difficult to do that. So your villain kind of becomes your agent or why things are happening. So make them interesting, give them a reason for what they're doing. And the best villains often are ones that make the players doubt their own actions or their own motivations. Like, why am I, doing this? Like Magneto was right. If you can give them a Magneto was right moment, that would be fantastic. But that doesn't necessarily need to be your goal.
I like that you mentioned Magneto. That's something that always stays with me. That idea that he's actually the good guy. He is the good guy. Come on, guys, we all know it. He is. Come on, from a point of view. But no, isn't that what Anakin's? Oh no, a different panel. I love that. There's some brilliant stuff there in terms of everything that's been spoken about a villain. I think in terms of things to do, to stay away from, play with, things like that, especially for newer writers. I am actually a sucker for traditional stuff. I really love traditional stuff, whether it's a traditional setting, whether it's a traditional villain, but I do like to then be messed about with. So it's that kind of subversion. It's kind of, here's the thing you like and you're familiar with and you're playing this because you love, I don't know, Dracula, for example, but this is the thing. And you kind of get that new twist and that new scope. And I think that can be a tricky thing in itself, because if you're using traditional material, obviously there's a wealth of knowledge, there's an expectation, there's a pre-investment from people. So sometimes starting completely from new, and I've done this myself, where if I'm working on a Call of Cthulhu campaign or scenario, I haven't used a pre-existing mythos entity. I've created a new one, because then you get that ownership of it and you get to introduce your players and your keepers and everybody that's invested into something new. But there is something cool, it's called Call of Cthulhu. I do remember playing one of these games a long time ago, and purely by accident, I did enact the Call of Cthulhu. And even though it was a short-lived moment, it was bloody brilliant. It was so much fun, and it was a moment that I will not forget. But I think that's quite an interesting thing for people to think about as they're writing, is this idea that, where do you go? Are you going to write something that, if you did your Dracula, which obviously there's so many interpretations of, and I don't think anybody could say I know Dracula because of the various interpretations. Actually, I'm pretty sure one person at this table probably could. But there is that idea that you're treating your players to something unique, and I think that's the fun of it. That's the fun of what you can get with that.
I'll piggyback on that, Newman, just for a second, because of your love of the classical and the traditional. When I first started writing, a piece of advice I was given by a dear friend was, Nyarlathotep has been done to death. Do not do Nyarlathotep. And I said, but what about it? And they said, no, he has a whole campaign dedicated to him. You're not going to write better than that. And I mean, fair, it's one of the greatest RPG campaigns possibly in history, but it kind of piggybacked what you're saying, how I always invent a new mythos entity when I write. And maybe it's a partially cribbed from an existing entity of, okay, tentacles. How can I make tentacles work? Because you say about enacting the Call of Cthulhu, which I think if you do that, you win the game. I think you've won Call of Cthulhu.
You do, yeah. Just seconds before you lose the game is the... Yeah.
But at the same time, though, I mean, for a system called Call of Cthulhu, I have yet to encounter a scenario that involves Cthulhu. But some of my favorites have been these unique moments of just something called, like, the Watcher. Or, in my scenarios, I find a translator to different languages and give it a really crazy name. Because, yeah, Cthulhu is great. Cthulhu is he's the face on the Keeper's Handbook. He is the guy that everybody associates with Lovecraft. But I always feel like if we chain ourselves just to the existing entities, we're doing a disservice to the broad spectrum of cosmic horror that's available. Because if you only write Nyarlathotep, you only write Cthulhu, you only write Yog-Sothoth, there's so much more that can be played with beyond just shackling yourself to the existing rules. There are no rules. You write your own world. There are no rules.
Well,
there are some rules. There's this handbook of rules, but
there are only rules when other people are around. Okay.
There you go.
I agree and disagree to some extent. Lovecraft was notorious for not locking down his characters in any sort of meticulous way. Everything's vague and like witnesses and hearsay, and what a deep one really is only been sort of drilled down for the sake of clarity from a keeper's point of view by a Chaosium. Other than that, it's a whimful thing that's like muttered about in pubs on the seaside, and you can do what the hell you like with that thing. It doesn't really matter if it's called a deep one or if you call it something else. And yeah, I think they even say in the book, don't call a deep one, call it something else, a fish person or some sort of loathsome creature. Yeah, a murr or something. Yeah. And I like taking pre-existing sort of characters and twisting them just enough before you break their neck and like reintroducing them to people in a different fashion. And I think that's interesting because not only is it familiar, it also subverts as well. So you get the best of both worlds in some cases, and you can introduce your new entities and new followers and new avatars off of this new interpretation of it. So I do like doing that. When it comes to do's and don'ts for a new writer, though, don't put things in caves. I'm serious. Don't have something in a cave. Honestly, I keep doing it myself. Go, fuck, Graeme, I've done it again. You gotta rub that out and put it somewhere else. It's like just stop putting things in caves. It's the most basic thing you can do. That and time loops. Time loops are so popular right now. I'm gonna shoot myself if I see another time loop. But yeah,
you'll say that again tomorrow.
Yeah, probably. And the next day. But yeah,
you're right. I mean, the adventure I referenced is like from 1992.
Yeah, okay, bloody hell! It's back again. It's like, no.
Yeah,
same as it ever was.
I just pitched a time loop adventure to Green, so
nice.
I feel super proud.
I really hope that's true. But yeah, so try and look about on the market and see what's there and try and do something different is what I'm trying to get at. Don't just follow trends and rip things from headlines because that's what everyone's doing. Everyone's going, oh, did you see the news today? I'm going to write a scenario about what's on the news today. It's like, so is 20 other people. And you better be fast to get to market because it's going to be something else soon. Write what you know, write what you like, write what you want to research. Don't be dogmatic about rules. Follow your heart and, you know, what you love, and you'll get a far better scenario out of it than just doing something that will be borderline like shallow, basically, because you're just doing it to, well, be popular. Popularity is not going to make you happy at all. Writing what you want to write will make you happier.
Sorry, I know we still need to hear from some people, but just with that, Graeme was talking about humanity earlier on, and that's something that I hold dear to a scenario, to players and things. I think, you know, there are timeless themes and stuff, and being the drama nerd that I am, as a teacher, this is something that we teach, that we talk about, is thematic examples throughout history. You know, there are, if you look at the Greek mythic structure, there are still structures that work. I know they're not tabletop role-playing structures, but they work. But there's also thematic structures that work as well, because we're humans. So, rather than responding to directly what's on the news for first-time writers, maybe looking at some of those human experiences that will continue to still be relevant in 10, 15, 20, 100 years from now. Those are things that we can all relate to. And I think those are things that we all enjoy playing when we play, I say human characters, but we're not always playing human characters. Some of the best characters I've played are, vampires. Even a werewolf once.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. It's like the classic like monsters aren't really monsters. They're themes and like notes on society. Going back to the thing about capitalism, all these sort of thing. They're these broad stroke themes, but they're buried deep into the sort of makeup of these creatures, and there's something manifested as something else. And it's because they have this deep like sort of resonance with the entire public. They become very popular. So it's like the vampire, the fear of science with Frankenstein, and all these things, and all the morality that goes with it, and trying to wrestle with their own sort of psyches when it comes to these problems and fears that we have as a whole, is what will give you your best work, I think.
I need to let the smart people talk.
Let's see, that's a setup because I'm not sharp there. So no, I wanted to say something to reiterate. Geez, something Graeme said, especially for pitfalls for first-time writers, is keeping your concept kind of straightforward and simple, like not making it super complicated. I think he said something about like having 300-word pitch or something like that, or some nice concise pitch. Not that I've done this before, but like I have conceptualized a ridiculously complicated adventure, and then find out halfway through that I've like written like 3 times more than I should have. So like nobody look at the back of the Force and Destiny Star Wars adventure book and see where I had to cut severely, where parts that might not quite make sense if you really think about it.
Hey, that's just another scenario you have now. You've got 2 things to sell.
Sorry, guys, I'm just going to have a quick look at something. Just give me a minute. Just 1 sec.
Newman, you are a menace in the best way possible.
I've made so many failures. I've decided just to own up to all of them. But no, I mean, even like experienced writers might get a little too hung up with your idea and making it just ridiculously complicated. And a great exercise is like if you can just sum it up in a paragraph that feels like punchy and pithy, then that means you're kind of on the right track. At least your brain is focused and keeping your adventure focused. So if you find out that you've written 10 pages worth, and that's your summary, you're in deep trouble. And so yeah.
So that actually for me brings up kind of an interesting point, maybe to jump off into other topics. In terms of the writing process, we've all kind of talked about how like passion and obsession has played into the way that we write and the things that interest us. What do you do when you are kind of faced with, the failure of an idea? Either it doesn't come together the way you expected it to, maybe the feedback you get isn't what you were expecting, and you either have to scrap it, you have to kill your darlings, go back to the drawing board. How do you deal with that?
Not
crying gin, something like.
Heavy drinking.
Yeah, Enya, maybe.
I prefer Sinead O'Connor, but it's the same.
Different strokes. That's why.
Yeah, different strokes.
I just feel like, working in science, we're used to failing 85% of the time. So for me, it's like, yeah, throw it out, try again, because even if it doesn't hit, the next one's going to be better. If I stopped writing because something didn't work and I stopped at my first bad review, I would have 1 scenario published and none written since. Because my first scenario got a panning review, and I thought to myself, okay, we can do better. You just gotta brush yourself off. And after you sober up from the heavy drinking and everything like that, you just gotta keep going.
One trick I still do is that I will cut and paste chunks that have gotten the criticism, and I'll put it in a separate Word doc and then save that Word doc. Right? So like to me, my brain's going, oh, I haven't deleted like this work. I have saved it. I've saved my precious pearl. And then as I'm rewriting, and then I start forgetting that precious pearl because actually it's right that I should have cut that. Now it's at least saved on my hard drive, and I don't feel the guilt or whatever other complex emotions. But it's actually a good exercise. It's like, okay, if I cut this out, and look at what you got, go, hey, wait, it actually kind of works better because now I've streamlined it, or I've gotten rid of this idea that just is this red herring. So it's a really silly trick, but for me it works.
Moon, were you going to say something?
Oh, yeah, I guess it really depends on where you are in the process and if it's, something that's on deadline or not. Because I think we've all been there where something's just like not working and we just don't have the time to start from scratch. That is, that's something I've encountered, throughout all my journey as a writer. From my early days to today, where something just doesn't work and I don't have the time to start from scratch, so I've got to make it work, and that is very difficult. Sometimes it works out, and sometimes it doesn't. Unfortunately, sometimes you have to buckle down and do it. I think someone said something about vomiting out words. And that is really the best metaphor for being a writer. It's real. Well, there's other ones, but I don't know what the PG rating is on the panel. But in any case, definitely writing can be a pretty excruciating process, and sifting through the mess to find what's worth keeping can be very difficult. And the hard part often is, what they call killing your darlings, is you get stuck on things which, for some reason or another, you're just attached to, and you just have to get used to, slitting those throats. And it is difficult, but you have to do it. I mean, in some ways, it's a volume business. You'll have plenty of other wonderful, perfect characters to, put in terrible situations in the future. Look forward to them. I don't know what else there is to say. It's just, in some ways, I guess it is a way of seeing if it makes you feel better, you can think of yourself as a professional. The more times you basically have to destroy your own work to meet a deadline. So that's the mark of being a professional. Well, congrats. You're no longer an amateur. It's not perfect, but it's on time.
Cal, can I ask, if in that situation, do you reach out? Do you have kind of your trusted kind of group of folks that you can kind of go, look, this isn't working, help me with this? Or do you like thrash it out at the keyboard and like murder and rewrite and kind of go down that way?
Just my failures with other writers. No, are you crazy? No,
just checking. Trick question.
Oh, goodness. The only thing worse than yourself as a writer is other writers. Oh my goodness, I would never ever would I give.
Heard about
never ever. Yeah. Sorry?
Heard about the rubber ducky process?
No.
What's that?
I think coders use it, but I'm sure all of us have done it. You basically, if you have a problem, pick up a rubber ducky and you talk about the problem to your rubber ducky. Right?
Oh, yeah.
And after a while, after like maybe X amount of minutes, suddenly you're like, wait, I have a solution or an answer.
Yeah, I have cats.
Yeah, cats work.
Yeah. I unfortunately sometimes subject my girlfriend, my partner, to like these problems, and she'll just be nodding and like, oh yeah, that sounds like a problem. And I'll be like, yeah, but oh wait, what if I did this? And she's like, oh, that's a great idea, and she's very patient. But yeah, sometimes just like talking to something or just talking out loud somehow activates some other part of your brain that's like been mulling over the problem. And coders call it rubber ducky solution, is that you just pick up a rubber ducky, talk to it.
So maybe that's our advice.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I would never talk to other writers about it, but I would definitely talk to an inanimate object or a notepad or something.
Dr. Ducky is listening. Should you want to talk?
For sure.
Actually, to kind of bounce that, I don't have a rubber ducky I have a rubber ducky, yes, but I have a few key friends that I'll just soundboard saying, does this single sentence concept work? And they'll say either, yes, it's great, no, toss it, or where are you going with this? Or I think it's probably the most fun response is, where's the next step with this? Because then it challenges me to say, okay, well, I didn't think I'd get this far. And then you just kind of go from there.
Yeah, it's a dangerous thing to haggle with a committee about your own work. sort of thing. It ends up not being yours, or you're trying to please people, and all you're doing is making it for them rather than for yourself. It's like, well, what are you doing here, really? But I do have a few people I'll sound things off with, but I know that they won't self-serve. They won't just tell me what I want to hear, so they feel like they feel good about it, and I feel good about it, and everyone's happy. They're nasty bastards, and they'll just go in and say, "This is crap. This is crap. Fix this. Fix that," and you'll go away and you'll feel horrible. But it's the right thing to do. You've got to have thick skin, or at least be able to like be sulking for a while and come out the other end okay, to really get the best out of a piece of work. You need to look for people who will give you honest feedback. Being like nice about things is all good. So you need 3 people in your life basically. You need a cheerleader, someone who will always be in your corner and always go, yeah, they're just bastards. They don't know what they're talking about. You need someone who is kind of on the same journey as you, at the same level of writing that you can talk to about problems you can find. And you need someone that's above you that you can go to. Look, I need a bit of help here. What can I do? And they've been 30 years in the industry or whatever, and they'll just say, well, you can just do this and it'll be okay. Or you basically just scrap it, do it again, or, that sort of thing. But you really need that sort of trifecta of like support. But yeah, if something's not working, and I've got one that really isn't working right now, that's a big deadline, which is way in the distance. It's hard sometimes. You get stuck on something, and you really need to really buckle down and just get it out of the way and spit it out. But yeah, it's difficult sometimes to let things go.
So in a similar vein of thinking about feedback that you've gotten either from people in your committee or from playtests, whatever that looks like for your process, what is the best advice you've ever been given, or the best feedback, the most useful, something that you kind of carry forward? And then have you ever gotten advice or feedback that you would never pass on?
It's dangerous questions.
Yeah, my mum once said, "Believe in yourself," and it's debatable.
How dare you?
And look where you are now, Newman.
Exactly. How dare she?
Yeah. Advice I'd never
That's a
pass
tough
on.
one.
Yeah.
I mean, I was personally told when I started out writing for Gaslight that I would not be published and I shouldn't try.
Oh, that,
So
Jesus Christ.
that
Was
is
that my
the
mum
worst
as well,
advice
or?
I've been given.
She had like an email campaign on all the writers.
Yeah. She's vocal.
I can't believe someone said that to you. That's horrible.
That's terrible.
Well, ultimately, I think it benefited me because I decided that I was gonna blind pitch out of spite. So it did actually work out for me pretty well. So maybe I should put a little thank you note in my next in my next scenario or something, or name an NPC after him. We'll see.
Yeah.
But yeah, who dies horribly, just gets ripped apart.
Just send them a copy when you're finished with. Just send them a copy. That's all you need to do.
Sign it.
Yeah, or we're going to read the scenarios and go, "Who are the NPCs?"
Thank them, but they're your special thanks at the start.
Yeah.
But just to pivot back, best advice you've been given, or best feedback, most useful, and then if you've got bad advice, you're not gonna pass on to anybody you're mentoring.
Well, I don't know if I guess I can just speak from my own experience. I can't think of any, good or bad advice. I've been given that really changed things for me. I've been given lots of advice in my life, and very little of it proved true or helped me. Other than watch out for this guy. Sorry, I can't pass that stuff along. But that has always been true. But sorry, have to keep that stuff secret. Now, as far as what I could tell people is, if you're interested in making a run for it, making a career in writing, it's meet people, I guess, is the main thing. Like that's always what I've felt has really done the most for me. Other than the most important part, which is the writing. Like second to the writing is going out there and meeting other writers and the people making the games and making the books, whether at conventions or whatnot, or in discords, even if it's virtually. Like that is the best, because people are more interested in publishing or working with people who they've met and they know aren't AI chatbots, or crazy in a sense, or unreliable, whatever that means to them. Once you connect with someone in a real way, whether virtually or real, then when you come to them with your work, it's going to be more real to them, and you'll get a better sense of what people are looking for and what's already out there, especially when you talk to other writers. Um, and I guess the only other thing I'd say is, be collegial and be kind. That's the main thing. Like, writing is difficult work, and it's lonely work. So when you meet other writers, you realize that you're kind of sharing something kind of special with them, which is, this condition of being a writer, which is obviously, some kind of psychological traumatic condition that they have yet to find a cure for. They're trying very hard with these robots, but they haven't cured us yet.
Oh, they're almost there. Yeah.
I think that's a really good bit of advice, because it's advice that's not necessarily about writing. It's actually about being in the industry. I think that is such a powerful thing to say. Kind of meeting people. I've been very lucky in my experience to have met some pretty amazing people, and I am not ashamed to say, whenever I meet these amazing people, I'm usually writing down what they say, because you're making an impression, you're learning things, there's an experience, there's a wealth. There's so many people that have come before us, and I think if you pick up any significant book with any kind of significant publisher, you're looking in there, and usually there's comments and references to the many editions before that we've all learned from and evolved from. And I think some publishers are fantastic at recognizing those people and recognizing those early writers and the journey that we've gone on. And that's going to come from, because obviously the interwebs didn't exist at that time. It's going to come from meeting people and making those relationships. And I think, as Cal was talking about, those relationships are key to creating those writing partnerships or production partnerships. I think that's such an insightful thing to say. Obviously people have got to be out there and they've got to be writing something, so that you've got something you can evolve, refine, develop your skill as a writer. But I think meeting people is huge. And today's world, obviously, we get to do it like this, which is outstanding.
Yeah. Oh, good piece of advice. That's a different one, a bad piece of advice. I don't think I tend to dismiss things all the time, which is probably a bad thing. So I'm very headstrong and blunt, and I just roll through life, just pushing people out the way. Go, nah, I'm going to do it my way, which is probably bad. You should probably never do that. So it's probably my advice to you not to do.
Dismiss everything.
Yeah. Well, you should really if something doesn't serve you, you should probably dismiss it, even if it's right at the time. It might not be right for you at that moment, and you'll come back to it later and go, I understand what that's for now. So yeah, I wouldn't dismiss everything so bluntly now as I did when I started. And I'd say a piece of good advice is learn to write properly. It's don't just study scenarios, actually study writing. How to build characters, go out and to different fields of different writings, write technical, read technical manuals, read biographies, read all sorts of different sort of genres. Don't just stick with what you know and what you love. Try and break habits, because you'll get stuck in these circular ideas that will just repeat themselves in your work, and you'll become stagnant in your work. So you need to break out of that and just go to a library, pick up a random book. It doesn't matter if it's on weaving or politics of the 50s. It doesn't really matter. Crop rotation during the Nazi period, something like that. And if no one cares, just read it and take something away from it, and try to expand your knowledge base. The more you know about how things work in the world and how things just are, the more you can sort of naturally just include things in your writing as well. So yeah, expand. Don't just sit and read scenarios. Do other things.
Since I'm also like on the editor side of things, is like to sync up what other people have said is definitely don't go into things in an adversarial way.
Yeah.
Like there's a, it's also the community of writers. You're not really competing with each other. We're all peers. We're all like enjoying or suffering in this industry together. But like it goes the similar with editors. Like editors should definitely try to not be as cranky as they normally are with their writers. But like writers definitely understand when editors are trying to point out issues in your draft. They're not doing it to be jerks. They're trying to like polish it for the product. So it is very illuminating for me to be on both sides of things. To as a writer, try not to get annoyed at the editor, and as an editor, try not to get annoyed as the writer.
Yeah, just to touch on that, it's like working with editors is very, very humbling. They will take you apart in straight order sometimes. And when I was doing my story for Rusty Quill for Magnus Protocol, they rejected my first script wholesale, and that was kind of devastating. And I had to go back and rewrite the whole damn thing. But what I did with that old script was I rejigged it into another story, and I managed to sell that as well. So going back to saving your old stuff that someone doesn't like and keeping it in a file somewhere, not destroying your darlings, just keeping it somewhere else. You can always revisit them, and they can become other things. Don't waste anything.
I gotta agree with that. Don't waste anything. Every time I write a draft of something and I make significant edits, I don't overwrite the old file. By the time I finally go to submit something, it's the title _V 19.5.final. For real this time. Because, I mean, my advice I was given that I will always remember is just don't be afraid to write something, even if it's not something you know right away. Get something onto the page. You can always revise it later. That's probably why I have about 15 notes on my phone of just like one lines of, I want to use this eventually, because if I sat there and said, okay, I'm only going to write exactly what I know, there would be my library. Behind me, a bunch of chemistry textbooks. But branching out and trying something different, you find new ways to approach something, then creates this feedback loop. I like the way this worked. Can I use it in a different way again? And yeah, I mean, I just I always just write, and then revise. That's what I got.
I'd probably outline, then write, then revise.
You mean I shouldn't write 15,000 words and then realize it's garbage?
Hey, dude, you do you. That's all you need to do.
All right, so we are kind of approaching the last like 15, 20 minutes or so of the panel. I want to give everybody a little bit of time at the end to give your own little outro, where to find you, that sort of thing. So maybe one or two more questions, if there are any questions that are kind of burning in the YouTube chat. If you want to send those to me, that would be terrific. But if not, kind of try to end on maybe more of on an inspiring note. So beyond the monetary benefits of doing this professionally, what is the most rewarding part of writing for you? Is it the process? Is it the storytelling? Is it the feedback you get from people who write your work or play your work? What do you most look forward to, and what do you get the most, honestly, what do you get the most joy out of?
A random person in the street that you don't know saying they like something you've done. I think that's probably the best thing.
Yeah,
definitely.
But
you took the thing I was going to say.
But just getting something out. I mean, you've got an idea in your head that's stuck in your head. Writing it on a piece of paper gets rid of it as well. It's just like it bugs you until you put it down, sort of thing. I think that's most writers have this sort of unequivocal annoyance to put something to paper, and then they're satisfied or they're not, and then they rewrite it 12 times. But at least it's out there in the world somewhere.
I got a second having somebody you don't know approach you about something you wrote, because when I wrote my first scenario, I had somebody send me a Facebook message and say, "Hey," this months after it's been published, they go, "Hey, I saw your scenario, and I want to know if I have your blessing to make these changes." I said, "I put it into the world. It is you to make these changes, but please, what were you thinking?" And I rode that high for probably about a month or so, just knowing that somebody somewhere read something that I wrote and then wanted to talk about it, because so Graeme said about, you create something and then it's there and it exists and it's no longer just this amorphous idea. Actually, I screenshotted that Facebook message and saved it, because I mean, if you're having a bad day, just having something like that to fall back on just feels great.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's it's magical to create things just using words, and for other people to basically to experience things they never thought they would experience because of something you write. I mean, that is, I don't think there's a better word to describe it than magical in some sense. And being able to basically shape another person's like consciousness or perception through writing is, through words that you just put in a certain order as an incantation in a sense, is, it is what it is. I think for me, it's I'll have to agree with Graeme. It's getting it out of my head, getting it out of me. Whether someone else reads it or not is that's the dream, but it's more important that I get it out, because a lot of especially if it's something that's really been boiling in my mind or troubling me. I guess the best feeling is when you can make something happen or put something together that you didn't know how it was going to work. Like, the longer something stews inside you that you just can't put together, when it finally clicks, and I mean, for me, it's often on the page that it clicks. It's the process of writing that makes it click. When that finally clicks, that's the best thing. And it's like solving a hard math problem.
That was going to be my answer. I was going to say the click moment, the eureka moment. You figure out a story issue or something. Of course, it's mitigated by the thought that I'm the one who caused the problem in the first place. So it's kind of like I've conquered myself and won, but I've also lost. Anyway,
I mean, I've only just finished, I think it was the third draft of my first actual campaign book, which is with the editor at the minute, which is I am totally cool and not constantly cold sweating and crying. Everything is cool. But I think getting it to that state where it's like, boff, it's off. And I remember them saying, "Hey, I do this thing where obviously I'm going to write the comments and don't edit things yet, but if you want to reply to the comments, or do you want some time off?" I was like, "Can I have a week or two? I just need a week or two just to not be a part of it." But I think it was. There's an achievement there. There's a huge sense of achievement, and I think even if I go back to some of the smaller scenarios that I've written that have now been played bloody loads and loads and loads, or whether it's something that hasn't even come out yet, one of the first things we talked about was some of those set pieces. If some of those set pieces land with people and they get to kind of have their thing of it, like we talked about writing, and it's writing and does the writing work, but what we're doing, we're writing for role playing. So it's those players, they're not sitting there reading the words, they're sitting there getting the experience. I suppose if they get the experience that was not necessarily intended but was offered, that is, and if you get any kind of feedback on that, which I guess is, that's the quality of a product, isn't it? If people pick it up, people talk about it, that's it. That's your knowledge that it's landing. Those big set pieces, those moments, those things we talked about earlier. What's our experiences with things? All of that subconsciously is going to feed into how we create those wonderful set piece moments and we let them play. So I think That's the exciting thing. It's just, absolutely getting it out of your head, getting it on paper, but also that end thing. Did they get a really cool moment? Did they get to experience it in the way that not necessarily was intended, but the way that they did it?
All right, so we have one or two questions actually from our watching YouTube audience. So from Hedge, bearing in mind that this is thinking mostly about the information given to a keeper in a scenario, this is kind of a more structural question. So Hedge shares Graham's opinion that scenarios are technical documents, but is wondering what strategies all of you have for outlining the entire mystery quickly and succinctly so you can kind of just dive right in.
I can answer this if you want. All right, Hedge. Make a square and put your protagonist or your PCs, whatever they are hooked to start in one corner, and put 3 conflicts in the other 3 corners and start drawing lines to them. Everywhere they cross is a conflict between one of your themes or one of your protagonists, and that's where you get basically a very quick outline of your story. So, for example, if you take something like, what's a good example? Give me a quick story, like Jurassic Park or something like that. You've got the park. The park is itself as one of the protagonists. Then you have got the what's the security guy's name? Guy called again?
Oh,
Nedry?
Nedry, the guy who's stealing the
Nedry.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You put him in the lower corner.
Velociraptors?
Yeah, well, the Velociraptor would be part of the park, the overall park, and then you'd have the guy who owns the park as well in one of the other corners. And all these are conflicting sort of themes against your character. Now you start drawing lines to each of them, and they'll start crossing each other. And wherever they cross, that's a scene for you to pick up. So when the Jurassic Park hole crosses Nedry dies. You see how that works?
I'm doing this,
Yeah.
Graham.
Yeah, there you go. Well,
There
you
you
also draw them to each other as well. So draw them around as well. So you want
Okay.
everything to draw to everything. So you always get them links.
I really like that. It's a really cool visual way of.
It's real
exploring
quick to see
conflict.
if your scenario or your story will work.
Yeah.
All right. So in our last 10 minutes, are there any other questions from the YouTube chat or from our panelists that they would like to pose to each other? Because if not, we will kind of move into giving our outros, saying where we can find each other, that sort of thing. Give anybody in the YouTube chat just a minute to post anything.
Whilst they're posting, can I ask Cal a question? Put Mr. Moon on the spot. You wrote the Black Hand.
Yeah. Yes. Sorry. I didn't hear you. Did you ask me a question?
No, I'm just flat out stating that to start with because that deserves a moment of silence. It's outstanding. I was just going to say, writing something like that, it's a unique perspective, isn't it, of a world that's already full of monsters. Did you kind of approach that with any significant I don't know, ulterior mindset, or did you kind of know going into it how you gonna look at that?
Okay. Well, thanks for that question. And I had 2 other authors on that book who are both very skilled, Sia Liddick and Rachel Judd. And they, shared my passion for Sabbat vampire play. And basically, when we approached that book, the real goal was getting away from that kind of bite and cry Vampire the Masquerade play that had kind of become the crux of the play. Because Sabbat play, we felt, kind of gave that kind of transhumanist perspective. Like, what is it like to be a vampire and basically embrace the vampirism and no longer have I was a human as your main inflection point? It's like, okay, well, once you accept I'm no longer human, then what is vampire culture without, this kind of constant looking back at your, human self in a sense. Like once you've divorced yourself that much, we felt that was a kind of play that people want and that we wanted to exist. And it can be more visceral in a sense, and there's definitely opportunities for gore and splatterpunk and all that once you're no longer once you're no longer playing that kind of like, I did something bad, now like let me role play that bad feeling, which is that's a fine way to play, and I've certainly played that way, and that's a valid way to play. But if you wish to go beyond that, we wanted something there, and to explore vampiric spiritualism in a sense, or that wasn't just a mirror of human spiritualism and human morality. I mean, obviously it is. We're humans writing it. Sorry to spoil that for anyone. But so on some level, our only point of reference is being human as writers, but we do our best to put ourselves in the mindset from that. So that was our point of view. And also, last but not least, as we kind of talk about in the forward of the book, we thought it was a point of view and a perspective and a kind of play that's very pertinent to this moment in time. Because one thing Sabbat play basically confronts you with is there are these evil monsters that are old and they control everything and they're literally burning the planet down. What are you going to do about it? Like, if it's the end of the world, what are you waiting for? And we see that with young people today when like progressive movements are naming themselves Extinction Agenda. There is obviously a feeling of, what the hell are we doing? Just sitting around waiting for these old people to solve things that will never solve things because it doesn't benefit them to solve things.
It sounds like you
plays into that.
That's really cool. So it's the two things you've mentioned tonight as well that I've definitely written down. One is that you're talking about, like, there's that point of view, there's that opinion, there's that worldwide kind of, not necessarily agenda, but something you want to flag up there, which is clearly resonant in what you've just said. But also, it sounds like you've had the most amazing time sitting down with your co-writers. What, kind of having like a theological kind of discussion about the nature of these guys? Because that, the way you're talking about it, it sounds so like in depth into that the I suppose the theology mindset, spiritualist approach to this. I mean, that when you pick up the book and read it, that's what you get.
Oh, well, I appreciate that. Well, I am very old. So I've been LARPing Vampire the Masquerade, I don't know, for 30 years, I guess, since I was, 13 years old. So for me, it's definitely something I've given a lot of thought to. And it's kind of informed my perspective, not the game, but the ideas that have come to me from the game, and the idea of, like, Gehenna and all that, and of a kind of stifling status quo, and what people are willing to do to get out of that, to break out of, as Graeme said, to break out of things that don't serve them. You don't, if something doesn't serve you, then get rid of it. And that is very difficult when the thing that doesn't serve you is the entire system. And so that's kind of what I felt Sabbat play was really talking about, was basically, I think there's a quote in the book. I don't remember the exact quote, which is kind of funny since I wrote it, which is I forget what it is, but it's basically like, how much of yourself are you willing to cut away to get to where you need to go, is basically the to paraphrase it, is you basically have to kind of walk this sword to get to the other side. You have to cross this abyss, and the only bridge is a sword, and the sword cuts away you. So how long are you willing to walk that knife's edge to get to the other end? Like, how much of you is going to be left when you get there? And is the goal so important that you're willing to sacrifice everything, including, your own humanity? So that's kind of the crux of the Sabbat, is it's about sacrifice, for a greater good, and in a sense using evil as a tool for a greater good, and that's a very interesting story.
All right. Thank you all so much for joining us in the YouTube chat, both now live and also after we've posted, after we've all met. It's been, well, just speaking from my experience, it's been a great time moderating the panel. I'm still a little surprised and overjoyed that the mods of the Good Friends asked me to moderate panels for Weekend with Good Friends. I feel like I've learned a hell of a lot in the past hour or two, and how lovely to get to share this time with all of you. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences with me. We'll go down the line and just kind of tell us a little bit about yourselves, for anybody maybe who joined us late, where to find you. I'm VJ Stonecraft. I'm a curator by day, Khelil by Gaslight writer by night. I have some publications upcoming for Khelil by Gaslight through Chaosium. How about we start with you, Doc? I'm just going to go straight down the line with who's on my screen.
All right. I am a Matt Doc Tracey, chemistry professor by day, horror enthusiast by night. If you want to find my scenarios, they're available on Miskatonic Repository. I've got 2 up there now and working on at least 2 more by the end of the summer, fingers crossed. We'll see how the timeline goes. You can get in touch with me. I am on a variety of Discords. Just try any variation of Doc or Doctor on there, and there's a pretty good chance I'll be the person who comes up.
Next, I have Graeme.
Hello. I usually hang around in my own Discord at RPG Nook, or you can find me on ASN at Slade Nobody. Easy enough to find. I'm usually in most people's Discords. If you just try and find me, I'll probably pop up as well. But yeah, you can find my scenarios on RPG. Drive Through RPG, and a few other places as well.
And Monte?
Hi, I'm Monte Lin. I am a freelance writer and editor. You can find my contact information on my website at monte-lin.com. I am taking editing work, so if you have a draft that you need some help on, I can try to be as kind as possible to pass it along to fellow writers. So,
Moon.
I'm Khaldoun Khelil. People call me Moon. I'm a writer and RPG, and my work can be found on Drive Through RPG, also the Storyteller's Vault, including the Black Hand playing the Sabbat, which got a lot of plugging. So I appreciate that. You can also find me on Twitter at Khelil. Though there I mostly talk about politics, less games. I do talk about games there sometimes, but mostly politics and stuff. Yeah, that's me.
And last but not least, Newman.
Last and least, I'm afraid. I'm T.A. Newman. I am the host of the Miskatonic Playhouse. You can find me on any kind of Miskatonic Playhouse social medias, but you're best off coming in the Discord to have a chat, really. Scenarios on Drive Through RPG, but yeah, hopefully in the near future, my Cthulhu Regency horror campaign is coming out, Cult and Culpability, which I'm extremely excited, in brackets, nervous about. And I can confess, just for Cal, to this day, I am still a kiss and cry vampire player. I have yet to venture into the Sabbat. Not long, it's going to happen, but I'm still a kiss and cry. There you go.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your weekend with good friends, and hopefully we'll see you at other panels or in games very soon. Thank you so much.
No problems.